Hello and welcome. Today, author R.T. Cagle shares another inspiring story from the Bedtime Stories with Heart and Soul series, written to help you slow down, reflect, and end the day with a little more peace. Now, here's the author.
Hello, my name is author R.T. Cagles. Today's story is called The Impossible Dream. So, let's get started. In a quiet town nestled at the foot of towering mountains lived a young woman named Suzy. From a young age, she had always been captivated by the idea of reaching the highest peaks. To her, those mountains were more than just a collection of rocks and trees. They were a symbol of something greater. Every morning, she would gaze out of her window at the distant, snow-capped summits and dream of the day she would stand at the top, feeling the cold air kiss her skin and the vast world spread out beneath her. But Suzy was not born into a family of adventurers or mountaineers. In fact, her family and friends often found her dreams fanciful, even foolish. Her father worked as a mechanic in the town's garage, and her mother was a school teacher. No one in their family had ever ventured beyond the valley. They lived simple, grounded lives, and they were content with it. "You've got your head in the clouds again," her mother would often say with a patient smile. "Climbing mountains is for people with money, training, and experience. Why don't you focus on your studies or get a job in town? There's a future in that." But Suzy couldn't shake her dream. No matter how much she tried to focus on what others called real life, her heart always drifted back to those towering peaks. Every night she read about famous climbers who had scaled impossible heights and overcome challenges that seemed insurmountable. She devoured stories of adventure and exploration, finding herself drawn to the idea that anything was possible if one had enough determination. One evening, as Suzy sat on the porch of her family's modest home, she overheard a conversation between her parents. Her father was concerned about their financial situation. The garage wasn't doing well, and the family had been struggling to make ends meet. "We'll have to tighten our belts," her father said with a sigh. "There's no room for any extra expenses." Suzy felt a pang of guilt. How could she think about pursuing her dream of climbing when her family was struggling just to get by? She knew that her parents would never be able to support her aspirations. The equipment alone for such an expedition was more money than they could afford, not to mention the cost of training and the time it would take to prepare. It all seemed so impossible, so far out of reach. But then Suzy remembered something she had read in one of her adventure books. "Where there's a will, there's a way." The words echoed in her mind, taking root deep inside her. She realized that she didn't need money or external support to start her journey. What she needed was determination. If she truly wanted to reach the top of those mountains, she would find a way to do it, no matter how hard it seemed. The next morning, Suzy set her plan into motion. She woke up before dawn and began training, using the resources she had available. The mountains might have seemed distant, but the town itself was surrounded by hills and small peaks. Every day she would hike up the steepest trails she could find, carrying a heavy backpack filled with stones to simulate the weight of climbing gear. It wasn't easy. Her legs burned, and her lungs ached with every step, but she pushed through the pain. She would not give up. On weekends, Suzy worked odd jobs around town, saving every penny she could. She cleaned houses, mowed lawns, and even helped out at her father's garage, learning how to fix cars and change tires. It wasn't glamorous, but she was determined to earn enough money to buy the equipment she needed. Little by little, her savings grew. She spent hours researching the cheapest yet safest climbing gear, learning how to stretch her meager funds as far as they would go. As months passed, Suzy's efforts began to pay off. She grew stronger, her endurance increased, and she started to feel more confident in her ability to tackle the mountains. But there were still many obstacles in her path. One of the most significant was the lack of proper training. She knew that climbing those towering peaks would require more than just physical strength. It required skill and knowledge, something she didn't have. She couldn't afford to hire a professional trainer or attend expensive climbing schools. But Suzy wasn't discouraged. She turned to the internet, watching hours of free instructional videos, studying the techniques of professional climbers, and reading everything she could find out about mountaineering. She practiced what she learned on the small hills around town, perfecting her technique as best as she could. There were moments when it felt like too much. The weight of her dream pressed down on her shoulders like the stones in her backpack, and the doubts whispered in her ear, "You're not good enough. You'll never make it. Who are you to think you can achieve something so impossible?" But every time those doubts surfaced, Suzy remembered the phrase that had become her mantra. Where there's a will, there's a way. She refused to give up, even when the road ahead seemed too steep to climb. Finally, after nearly 2 years of preparation, Suzy felt ready. She had saved enough money to buy the last pieces of equipment she needed, and her training had brought her to the peak of her physical condition. She stood at the base of the mountain that had haunted her dreams for so long, staring up at its towering cliffs and jagged edges. The summit seemed impossibly far away, lost in the clouds, but Suzy was not afraid. She knew that the climb would be difficult, perhaps the hardest thing she had ever done. But she also knew that she had the strength, the knowledge, and, most importantly, the will to make it to the top. The first day of the climb was grueling. The terrain was rough and unforgiving, with sharp rocks and steep inclines that made every step a challenge. Her muscles screamed in protest, and there were moments when she wondered if she had made a mistake in believing she could do this. But every time doubt crept in, Suzy pushed it aside. She focused on each step, one foot in front of the other, never looking too far ahead. The summit was still far away, but she knew that as long as she kept moving forward, she would get there eventually. As the days passed, the climb grew more difficult. The air thinned as she gained altitude, making it harder to breathe. The temperature dropped, and the wind whipped against her, chilling her to the bone. There were times when she had to stop and catch her breath, her body trembling from the cold and exhaustion. But still, she pressed on. On the third day of the climb, a storm rolled in, dark clouds blocking out the sun and bringing with it icy winds and snow. Suzy found shelter in a small cave, huddling inside to wait out the storm. As she sat there, shivering and alone, the enormity of what she was trying to do hit her. She was just one person, attempting something that most people would never even dream of. And yet, she had come so far already. "Where there's a will, there's a way," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. The storm lasted through the night, but by morning, the skies cleared. Suzy emerged from the cave, her body stiff and sore, but her spirit unbroken. She resumed her climb, determined to reach the summit no matter what. Finally, after days of struggle, she made it to the top. The moment she had dreamed of for so long was finally here. She stood at the summit, the world spread out beneath her in all its vast beauty. The air was thin, but it felt pure, and the cold wind seemed to carry a sense of triumph. Suzy had done it. She had achieved the impossible. As she stood there, looking out over the mountains and valleys below, she realized that her journey had been about more than just climbing a mountain. It had been about proving to herself that with enough willpower, determination, and hard work, just about anything was possible. The mountains had tested her in every way, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. But she had overcome them. She had found a way. And so, in that moment, Suzy knew that no matter what challenges life threw her way in the future, she would face them with the same determination. Because she had learned a valuable lesson. Where there's a will, there's always a way. Thank you for joining me.
Hello again. As we come to a close, remember to like, subscribe, and follow us so you don't miss a single adventure. Thank you for spending this heartfelt moment with us. Until next time, we hope this story brought you a little peace as the day comes to a close.